The Sega CD, or Mega CD, depending on the territory in which you lived, is a very odd system. A last-minute add-on for Sega's second major console that added a bunch of storage and not much else. Since you couldn't use the CD storage to store higher quality models or anything that it would be used for in the next generation, a lot of games ended up using this space to just cram tons of FMV into the game. But it could be used wisely as well, though it was actually used that way in very few cases. But today, we're looking at one of those rare cases, Snatcher. Now to be clear, Snatcher was originally a PC-88 game, but it was ported quite a few times, including this version to the Sega CD 6 years after its original release. And it's this version that's generally considered to be the best, especially if you're playing in English like I am here. The first thing that really struck me about Snatcher was the pure vibes. Granted, this is what had drawn me to the game in the first place, but once you're in it, they stick around for a long time. The pristine pixel art, the voice acting, and especially the incredible music all do a great job of putting you right into the game's futuristic cyberpunk world. To be clear, just like anything else, there are plenty of missteps in this department, and the voice acting in particular can dip in quality at certain times, but it's all quite impressive, especially given the other kinds of voice acting we were usually getting around this time. All you have to do is go watch some short clips of basically any other Sega CD game to know what I'm talking about. It truly is night and day. As to what the game actually plays like, pretty much all Sega CD games were very limited in what was possible due to the incredibly slow read speeds of the CD drive, and you can see that on display basically in every game for the system. At its core, Snatcher is an adventure game, a very traditional one, but making use of the latest technology of the time in its storytelling. That being said, unlike many other adventure games that were coming out around the same time, Snatcher basically only gives you a list of options to choose from, whether it's moving around, talking to people, or performing actions. There's no open system where you can choose things and then what to do with them. It's just a list of predefined choices, some of which will only be unlocked for you after you've met some condition by doing something else beforehand. You will almost always be able to both look and investigate things in the world, however, and you'll often need to do both in order to progress. So, for example, in order to get something out of a drawer, you'll need to first investigate the drawer, then use a key from your inventory, then investigate the item that you want to get out of the drawer. This can feel tedious, but since the game lets you save anywhere, your chances of having to do it multiple times for any given scene are pretty low. The seeming lack of freedom is very normal for a Sega CD game, but can also feel somewhat limiting. The game has to make up for these limitations in other ways, and thankfully Snatcher does this magnificently. More than the vast majority of Sega CD games, it's amazing what Snatcher is able to do with what are basically just a ton of dialogue menu options through some very creative use of them, and being very creative in terms of how to bring those together with the sprite-based visuals to create unique and fun puzzles as well. Though even calling them puzzles is a slight overstatement, as they're generally not particularly challenging. Still, the game makes up for that in pure immersion in its world, something that the vast majority of most other adventure games weren't offering at the time, and Snatcher was very much able to, due to the inherent advantages of the CD format in terms of storing both high-quality voice and music data. The game doesn't nail everything it does with its system, though. The most obvious example being a computer system you can look up people and information in. You'll need to do this in order to answer riddles, or to prove to a specific person that you are who you say you are. You'll have to go look up things in the database, which leads to some incredibly awkward interactions where you fly your car to a place, talk to someone who won't let you in until you answer some questions that you have to input manually on a virtual keyboard. So then you have to go back to HQ, plug the exact right names into the computer to get info, then go back to where you were before. It's an interesting mechanic in theory, but would have felt a lot less like padding and been a lot less immersion breaking in general if you could have just interacted with the database from Metal Gear. And that brings us nicely to the very interesting fact that yes, Snatcher is a very early Hideo Kojima game, sandwiched between Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2, and it's always lingering over the precedings throughout in terms of the tone and the vibes, knowing what we know today about the rest of his games. But there are also references to his previous titles, and plenty of ideas and themes that he would reuse going incredibly far into the future. The most blatant reference, however, is the aforementioned Metal Gear. In fiction, this cute little robot buddy is called Metal Gear Mark II, named after the war machines from the Metal Gear games, and will often analyze things you find like your own little mini CSI lab. He can also serve as a video phone, and just like how you have to manually input things into the computer back at headquarters, when you call people using Metal Gear's phone, you have to know their number. He'll helpfully remind you of some, though not all, that you found in the world. Enter the number wrong, though, and you'll get stuck in a cute not in service message that's even fully voiced. In general, it's frankly going to save you a lot of trouble if you keep a notepad around to jot down incidental phone numbers and names and the like, and in a way kind of puts you in the whole investigator mood. The plot is way too much to go into too much detail, and I wouldn't want to spoil that anyway, but it's clear the game was heavily inspired by Blade Runner and other cyberpunk fiction. You play as a specialized cop called the Junker, who is tasked with taking down Snatchers, robotic entities that masquerade as humans by killing people and taking their place. It has a lot of twists and turns, and I think has a pretty unsatisfying end at the end of Act 2, which is where the original PC versions of the game ended. Later versions of the game, including the Sega CD version, added a third act that gives a much more satisfying end of the game. And while I still found the villain's motivations wholly unsatisfying at the end of the day, I found the ultimate villain monologue at the end of Act 3 far better than the one at the end of Act 2. The game also has combat, though it's coming this late in the video for a reason. It boils down to what is essentially, almost literally, a shooting gallery. In fact, the game has support for light guns, though I didn't bother in this case and simply used the generic Genesis controller. It takes a little getting used to because you have to hold the position down you're aiming at while shooting, but the game gives you plenty of opportunity to get decent at it in the literal in-game shooting range before you're faced with it in a life or death situation. There was only really one set of combat encounters near the very end of the game where I found the two encounters that essentially serve as the game's final boss incredibly frustrating. Snatcher is fascinating from a historical standpoint, sure. It's a very important game that had a hugely outsized impact compared to its relatively anemic sales at the end of the Sega CD's life, but honestly, if you're a fan of adventure games and you've never played Snatcher, it still holds up pretty darn well to this day, and I absolutely think just about anyone should at least give it a look.